This is a brief overview of South African labour legislation. The intention of this short video is to give you a high-level overview of how labour law is structured in South Africa and where to look for what, and essentially what are the sort of fundamental things that a line manager should know about our labour law. Firstly, our labour legislation, which is recognised globally as one of the most sophisticated and correct labour legislation structures, provides rights to employees and employers. It protects the work environment and ensures that our work environment is governed by a secure legal practice which evens out the balance between worker power and employer power. The legislation is built of our constitution, and in the South African Constitution, the rights of all citizens are prescribed. This includes the right not to be discriminated against, things like the right to participate in strikes or to associate with organizations of your choice, and also a unique South African right in it, that is the right to put in place measures which deal with legacy discrimination issues. So we're going to cover the different acts in the South African labour relations landscape, and the first one is the OSH Act. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is a significant document. It's like the size of a very large dictionary. And in this document, there is legislation which covers just about every conceivable workplace. It provides for things like safety committees, the use of PPE, the requirement of people to be properly licensed when using mechanical vehicles and instruments in organizations, and many, many other health and safety measures. On the other side, there's the Skills Development Act. This act is designed to ensure that training and development which takes place in the workplace, which has a formal structure, is recognized within the National Qualifications Framework. And this act has provided that there would be funds for such training and that this training would meet minimum standards as prescribed by SETA, Sector Education and Training Authorities. Is the Unemployment Insurance Fund. Simply this fund is established through contributions which employers make on a monthly basis to ensure that if employees become unemployed, there would be some protection or some resources available to them. Then, of course, there's the Employment Equity Act. This act is unique to South Africa and is designed to ensure that organizations, both employers and employees, address the historical inequities of our society within their organizations. This act focuses on two specific areas. One, the removal of inequitable practices and discrimination, and the other, the setting of numerical targets for the organization with regards to better representation of race groups across their organization as targets. Employment Equity Act also provides for the establishment of employment equity committees which oversight this process. The Labour Relations Act is a complex piece of legislation which covers a wide range of labour relations practices and establishes our labour relations environment. This act provides for the establishment and recognition of trade unions, likewise the establishment and recognition of employer bodies, the collective bargaining process, the management of the right to strike, the establishment of our labour courts, CCMA, labour appeal courts and the like, and also legislation around things such as fair practice when it comes to dismissing employees for misconduct or for incapacity or as a consequence of operational requirements or the sale of a business as a going concern. So this act covers most labor relations practices which occur within organizations and stipulates certain practices as automatically unfair labor practice. And then, of course, there's the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and this act is designed to set minimum standards of employment for all employees. This act envisages things such as working hours, paternity, maternity rights, annual leave, and the like. In this act, you will find guidelines as to the minimum employment practices which are required in all workplaces, and it gives the Department of Labour the ability to check on these. Of course, these acts in themselves are underpinned by our organizational practices, and our organizational practices also are recognized as legally binding. So our company policies, our collective agreements, and our custom and practice within our organizations become legally binding as a consequence of their application. In other words, to change them is a unilateral practice, and that is also unfair. Now, all of this is governed fundamentally by our employment contract. So each employee has a contract of employment. This contract is probably the starting point. We establish a contract with the employer, and this contract may not include clauses in which we give away our rights. So any of the rights stipulated above are assumed within the contract of employment. And the contract of employment generally would establish how the different elements of the Act work in practice and how different company policies, collective agreements and practices are put in place. And employment contracts are a requirement established in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. There are two other acts which are worth mentioning. The one is the Compensation for Occupational Diseases Act, and these provide some compensation if someone acquires an occupational disease. The other is the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. This act stipulates or is structured in such a way that it is intended to encourage the establishment of black economic empowerment. And how it works simply is that organizations are given points based upon their compliance with the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act. Based upon the points, they get access to government business or government advantage. So organizations with higher points are more likely to be able to access business and or advantage in terms of what the government provides to companies. So broad-based black economic empowerment is a crucial score which organizations measure as they interact with the government. The score is established by looking at things such as the ownership structure of an organization, the management and leadership structure of the organization, the development and education of employees in this organization, and the establishment and promotion of enterprise development. So suppliers and small businesses which supply to our organizations, all focused at the recognition of black. And the category of black is in the broadest category, including colored, Indian peoples. So your score will determine your ability to do business within the public-private sector. And it has a trickle-down effect. So organizations who are doing business with the government sector require that their suppliers do well in terms of their equity, their broad-based economic empowerment, because their scores influence the primary business. In overview, South Africa has a complex legal structure. This legal structure requires some expertise to understand and interpret when we are in areas of conflict and difficulty. However, the fundamental principles that emerge in this legal structure and which line management should keep in mind are pretty simple. Some of the important things that we should remember are that in South Africa we are required to behave in a fair way. That means we need to be fair when we dismiss employees or provide recognition to trade unions or retrench people. There needs to be a policy and there needs to be processes. If we follow the rules, then labor legislation actually tells us how to do the stuff we need to do. We may need to get some legal support, either from an HR practitioner or a labor lawyer. But fundamentally, the principle is do the fair thing and you're probably on the right side of the law. I hope this is of some assistance. It's just meant as an overview. If you have very specific questions, these things would need to be addressed with an expert. Thank you.